For the second year in a row, the Rangers were very active in free agency, but did they do enough to challenge the Mariners and Astros in the division? We'll discuss on today's AL West preview here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Friday, March 10th, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description below. On today's show, we'll continue our AL West preview series with a look at the Texas Rangers. And like we did with the A's on Tuesday, we'll go over what the Rangers did this offseason, how their roster looks overall, and what our expectations are for them in 2023. But before we do, be sure to stick around until the midway point of the show to find out how you and a friend or family member can see the Mariners for free in April or May. Your choice. So, Colby, we have to start here when talking about the Rangers offseason. Jacob deGrom. Yes, they signed Jacob deGrom, who is, to many, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, if not the greatest pitcher of all time. Obviously has dealt with some injuries the last couple of years, has not been able to stay on the field. But aside from deGrom as well, they added Andrew Heaney. They added Nathan Eovaldi. They've completely rebuilt their rotation. They have John Gray, who's coming from last offseason. They re-signed Martin Perez, who's coming off of a great year, into his late 30s, kind of a revitalization of his career. So this is a pretty good rotation on paper, but there are a lot of injury concerns with these guys. A lot of injuries within their track record, and they've already reported some injuries here in camp. Jacob deGrom still hasn't made a start in spring. Nathan Eovaldi still hasn't made a start in spring. John Gray has reported some discomfort. This has been an issue for them already. I mean, I've said in the past that it's hard for me to buy in on this team considering all the injury concerns. What do you think? How do you feel about this team and what they did this offseason?
I think they certainly got better, which is obviously the goal. The issue with how they got better is that they didn't do it with what's the word here? They did it with plenty of risk added in, and they spent a lot of money to go out and acquire these risky players. Now, if you get 25 starts from, Jacob deGrom, he's probably worth that contract, but again, you're still talking about 7-8 starts where you're not going to have them. That's 2 months, without your big, $175 million arm. And we talk about Heaney. Heaney has been pretty mediocre his entire career, with the exception of last year with the Dodgers, when he wasn't asked to start, every 5 days. So can he do it again? Can he maintain his health? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Martin Perez, again, great year last year. Can he do it again? I don't know. We're about to see. Perez also has his own injury concerns. And Eovaldi, some days he's great. Sometimes he's really bad, and sometimes he's hurt. And there's really no in between. So how do you rely on these guys on a day-by-day basis? I don't know that you do. I don't know if you can. And when you look at kind of what the Rangers have in terms of starting pitching depth, they brought in Jake Odorizzi in a trade, but Odorizzi is also dealing with an injury. And when I look at what they have coming up, there's nothing coming up right now that is going to, drastically tip the scales. Jack Leiter can't find a strike zone right now. The fact that he's consistently ranked over Bryce Miller is a joke. Leiter's not a major league guy right now. Owen White, fringy major league guy right now. Still like him long term. And Cole Winn is probably the next guy up. And those are good prospects, but they're certainly not game changers, at least not as we've seen it. There's not a George Kirby in that group this year. So they don't have a ton to offer in terms of depth. And I feel like they're going to need depth with this rotation, because they did not build it on a bedrock of healthy arms. So we'll see. It definitely could work out for them. If all these guys make 30 starts, it's a very good rotation. What are the odds that all of them make 30 starts?
Right.
0.
So 5-year, $185 million contract for Jacob deGrom. This, of course, comes off of last offseason when they gave a couple of big contracts to Corey Seager and Marcus Semien. And those guys obviously projected to be at the top of their lineup. Nathaniel Lowe was a revelation last year. Josh Young came up late in the year and had a decent cup of coffee in the majors. Certainly gave the Mariners some issues in their games against them. But this offseason, they really didn't do anything to address the lineup. They signed Robbie Grossman, who is coming off of a pretty mediocre year with Detroit and Atlanta. And that's about it. They signed, Clint Frazier, a favorite of yours, to a non-roster invite. Who knows if he's going to end up making the team or not out of camp. And again, that's about it on the roster or on the position player front. So again, looking at roster resource here on Fangraphs, their projected starting 9 against righties is Semien, Seager, Lowe, Adolis Garcia, Jonah Heim, Robbie Grossman, Josh Young, Brad Miller, former Mariner, and Leody Taveras, with Mitch Garver, Ezekiel Duran, Josh H. Smith, and Clint Frazier on the bench. And that's just, there's still a lot of holes in that lineup, right?
Yeah, you get past the top 3, and there are some serious question marks. I like Garcia. He's a fun player to watch, but the dude doesn't get on base. Jonah Heim has kind of done it once. He's kind of similar to Cal Raleigh, where we're kind of like, okay, that's cool. You did it once and it was really helpful and it was good, but can you do it again? I don't know. And we'll see, how Heim kind of rebounds, how he repeats now that there's a book on him. Grossman's coming off a terrible year. But I still do like the bat. I think he's a pretty solid bat. And then, Young and Miller and Tavares, there's some upside there, but it's not a lot. There's not a lot there. This is a team that is built on, hitting home runs, and there's not a lot of on-base skills present in this lineup. So to me, you get past the first 3 guys. It's not that it's a cakewalk after, 4 through 9, but it's not exactly murderer's row. It's not a very deep lineup. I think the Rangers are really hoping that somebody like Young takes a huge step forward, or maybe it's Duran, jumps up and he takes an everyday spot, or Josh H. Smith. And those are all, those are young players that I like. I think there's some real talent there, but until they actually do it, it's hard to project, because none of these guys are Julio Rodriguez. I mean, they're not like easy to project as successes right away. So we don't know if that's going to pop this year. And every year it doesn't pop, Corey Seager gets older, Marcus Semien gets older,
right?
Nathan Eovaldi gets older, Martin Perez gets, so you've kind of put yourself in a position where these guys have to pop right now, or I have to keep spending more and more money to build so I don't miss this window. This roster is kind of starting to look like the 2018 Mariners, where it's got a lot of big names and it's got a lot of players who can hurt you and they can maybe do some damage. But if one thing goes wrong, if 2 things go wrong, the difference is that Texas still has a pretty good farm system.
Yeah, so they have to pitch their butts off here.
Yeah.
But you look at this lineup and talking about teams that could use Brian Reynolds.
Yep.
This is one of them.
Teams that can probably afford Brian Reynolds. This is one of them.
Yeah, that too. Yeah. Looking at their bullpen here real quick, pretty much same as last year. They did add Will Smith, the lefty who was most recently with the Astros. And then you mentioned Jake Odorizzi, who they acquired from the Braves. Maybe they're going to run a 6-man rotation, or if everyone's healthy, or maybe he's just a spot starter, long relief guy at this point. Basically, what the Mariners are trying to do with Chris Flexen. They acquired him, I believe, for Colby Allard from the Braves. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna just kind of look at this roster overall and talk about our expectations for this Rangers team, and kind of talk about the narratives that have been going, revolving around this team here for a little while in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by Built Bar. Looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? And you got to try Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. If you're like me, where you want to eat healthier but don't want to compromise taste, then man, I've got just the thing for you. You got to try Built. What Built Healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious you won't think they're good for you, which is perfect for your New Year's resolution. And what makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they are all covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they are healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to wait around to get yourself a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built bars at Built.com. Now you can get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. And if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab yourself a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter, and churro. You can thank me later. Want to see the 2023 Mariners up close and personal? I'm giving away 2 main level tickets to one of the Mariners value games in either April or May. The game is up for you to decide if you win. Eligible series for this giveaway are the ones with the Angels and Brewers in April and the Rangers and A's in May. All you have to do to enter is subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave a comment on any of our episodes from this week. We will randomly pick a video and a comment from that video to determine a winner next week. Good luck and go M's. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen here on Friday as we preview the 2023 Texas Rangers, one of the Mariners' divisional rivals. And there are a lot of people out there, Colby, that think this team is good enough to compete with the Mariners, maybe even the Astros within this division. People even within the Mariners fan base I've seen. Do you buy into that at all? Because I'm going to be real with you. No. I don't. Yeah.
No. Here's what I buy into. I think the Rangers can compete for a wild card spot this year in the same way that Baltimore did last year. But when I look at this roster and I compare it to Seattle's and Houston's, I still see a significant gap in talent. The Mariners and the Astros both have deeper lineups. They both have I don't want to say safer pitching staffs, but they both have staffs that are much more likely to give their teams 180 innings each than what the Rangers have. And then I look at the bullpens, and that's a huge difference. The difference between the Rangers bullpen and what the Astros and Mariners are going to run out there is night and day. So in order for them to compete with the Mariners or even the Astros, their bullpen is going to have to be, kind of do that like 2014 Mariners thing where it's just a bunch of guys and they all just happen to have career years on the same year, which isn't impossible. We've seen teams do that before, but yeah, my big concern with this Rangers team in terms of can they compete for a playoff spot? I don't know if they have the depth in their lineup. I don't think it's deep enough. And I don't know if they have the bullpen to do it or if they have the depth to back up their, let's say, fragile starting pitching staff. I don't know if they have major league depth. And they kind of skipped the important parts of a rebuild, which is building up this foundation and then adding stars on top of it. They've kind of done the opposite way where they've added stars and they're like, okay, now we can build a foundation around these stars. And that doesn't tend to work. At least it very rarely works in Major League Baseball. So we'll see if it does this year. I think the Rangers are going to be pretty good, but I don't think they're a playoff team based on where everything is right now. But yeah, I mean, they're certainly better than they were last year. But they're still, it feels to me like they skipped over some of the finer things about building a playoff baseball team that they've just simply kind of ignored.
Right. This was the 26th rank bullpen in terms of win probability added this past season. I believe they were minus 3.86, somewhere around there, 3.66, minus 3.66, which essentially means a very simplified explanation of that means that whenever the Rangers went to their bullpen, their chances of winning decreased.
Yeah.
They were not very good. And again, they didn't add much to that unit this offseason either. So they're mostly running with the same guys here. Jose Leclerc is the big name out of the bullpen. And, there's a couple of other, interesting arms in there like Jonathan Hernandez, Brock Burke. But this is still, I have my concerns about this bullpen. It's certainly not close. As you said, it's certainly not close to what the Mariners have going on and what the Astros have going on in their bullpens.
At least on paper.
At least on paper. Again, bullpens are so finicky, and that goes both ways, right? Mm-hmm. Guys could all have their, career worst years as they could all have their career best years at the same time.
Right.
So you never know. Yeah, you really never know with these guys. You don't, and we're not looking at the Rangers close enough to know, which guys are working on new pitches and what's the health situation looking like from last year into this year and all that. So there's obviously some context that's missing here when we have this discussion, but overall, I just looking at what I see here on paper, I don't see anything that's going to carry them because, again, a couple of injuries happen here, and then they have to turn to their young guys. That means that more pressure is put on the bullpen to perform, essentially, because you're going to have that bullpen carry you through some games, especially if you have young guys that are on innings limits, etc. So I have a lot of concerns here. Essentially, like I think that the ceiling for them is wildcard team. I agree with you on that. But that's really if everything goes right, and I just don't expect that everything is going to go right for them. So, especially on the health front.
Right. And again, you get past the top three in that lineup. It's not that you don't respect those guys hitting 4 through 9, but you definitely don't fear them. And there's a lot of, bad on base guys in that group. And there's a lot of, platoon type of guys who struggled last year against, strong side pitching. So there's a ton of questions here, and they could be answered. And we did this in June. We could be singing a different tune because, Young could be a 2-win player and Josh H. Smith could be hitting, 270, 340, 450. And, all of a sudden like, oh, well, now they have this legit, 1 through 6 or whatever. But as things stand right now, I don't see it. I just see a team that has a definite ceiling of a wild card team and barring any kind of big trade deadline acquisitions, which are always possible. I don't really see a playoff team yet.
So last year it took 86 wins to get into the playoffs in the American League. That's what the Rays had with the number 6 seed. Mm-hmm. Last year, the Rangers won 68 games.
Right.
So very simple question to you here. Did they do enough to add 18 wins, essentially? I know that's not exactly how it works, but...
Right. And I don't know because, you don't just have to go out and buy 18 WAR, right? That's not how it works because guys get better, they have better years, blah, blah, blah. And other teams around you get worse so that you can get better and you can win more games, yada, yada, yada. It's not as simple as just like, well, did they add 18 WAR? Yeah. So I don't know. I don't see that. I
guess a better way to phrase it would be, did they put themselves in a position to add those 18 wins, I guess?
There's a chance they did. I don't think it's a good chance. That's how I would kind of phrase it.
Right. I would say this is probably a 82, 83 win team,
Yeah, I could see this team being a real contender throughout most of the summer and then kind of fading as their depth or lack thereof kind of catches up with them. Kind of like Baltimore last year. So I think if you're looking for like a new Baltimore Orioles this year, it's probably Texas, but even that's different because Texas just threw money, right? Baltimore is taking the slow and steady path, and Texas just keeps throwing money at free agents and trying to skip the painful years of a rebuild. But we'll see if it works.
Well, if they don't get going this season and maybe find themselves in a position to sell off at least a little bit at the trade deadline, let's talk about some guys that might make sense for the Mariners here that we just see, just trying to project a little bit to tie the Mariners into this whole thing in just a moment. But real quick, a reminder, this episode of Locked On Mariners is brought to you by FanDuel, the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LOCKEDON to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. So we went over the roster here for the Texas Rangers. Colby, were there any names that I mentioned or maybe that you see on your end here that you think could be a fit for the Mariners if the Rangers end up kind of sputtering and find themselves in a position to sell in July?
Yeah, that's kind of part of the hard part is that the Rangers have kind of put themselves in a position where unless everything like literally falls apart and they're in last place, they kind of can't really sell all that much because they've either given a lot of money to these guys or they're not very good, right? So there's not a ton that's going to be available. Like they're not going to trade Nathaniel Lowe, right? And obviously nobody's going to buy Corey Seager's contract. But yeah, a few guys, Robbie Grossman possibly. We'll see what kind of year he has. The Mariners could have a need in the outfield or as part of the DH rotation where Grossman could make some sense. Yeah, I want to say Brad Miller, but
No,
I don't think I can. Yeah, John Gray or Eovaldi or Heaney, maybe one of those starting pitchers makes some sense if they're actually healthy, which we'll see. Some of the guys who are on shorter type of deals. And then out of the bullpen, I think, Jose Leclerc is a guy who they could probably get pretty decent amount for. Would the Mariners be interested? I mean, kind of depends on how their bullpen looks and how good of a year he's having. Brock Burke is a really interesting arm, but I think he's going to be pretty expensive if the Rangers were to move him anytime soon.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, we said this with the A's. We'll say this with the Rangers again. Really, any of the bullpen arms makes sense if they're good, right? And if it makes sense for the Rangers to move on from them. So really, name any guy here in the Rangers bullpen, and they could be a possibility. I like the Grossman call. He's someone that's going to be deadline bait. He's not going to get the team a lot. He's not going to get Texas a lot at the deadline, but he's someone that a fringe contender or even, maybe a real contender, depending on how he's playing, certainly going to have interest in, just given, the switch hitting versatility that he brings and all that. So, but yeah, there aren't a lot of guys that make a ton of sense here from Texas. Maybe Adolis Garcia, maybe.
He's so anti-control the zone.
Yeah. He's the complete opposite of what Jerry Dipoto and Justin Hollander have typically looked for. And yeah, they've bucked that trend here and there. At times they've been kind of selective with it.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't really see that. And I think if, Jared Kelenic doesn't pan out, Cade Marlowe doesn't pan out, etc., they're probably going to aim higher than Garcia to fill out that spot. Because or at least someone that fits more in line with their philosophy.
Right. But yeah, I mean, like, I don't see them trading like Tavares or probably not Duran or Smith. I don't think anybody's going to want to trade for deGrom. Not that he's probably going to be available, but Martin Perez only has 1 year, right? He's on the qualifying offer, I believe. So
right.
That's a rental that maybe makes sense. We'll see where the Mariners are at rotation wise. Heaney is a 2-year deal, so he might make some sense. Eovaldi, similar. So starting pitching, there could be some guys that the Rangers could move that the Mariners might be interested in. But overall, I think it's more likely that Texas is going to be a buyer at the deadline, almost regardless of what their situation is.
Right.
So I think if they do sell, it'll be, 1-year types, the rentals and all that stuff. And that would be Grossman, Will Smith, Martin Perez, those type of guys.
Well, it kind of feels like they're going to have to be in a position to add no matter what, kind of like the Mariners the last couple of years where we've, talked within the context of, not knowing if the Mariners were going to make it to the playoffs or not, but saying, you know what, they just given the position that they're in, they have to go out and add at the deadline. Add and sell, do a little bit of both. And again, that's where kind of the 1-year guys like Robbie Grossman and Martin Perez come into play here for the Rangers, because they're probably not a part of the long-term plan for Texas moving forward.
Right.
So something to keep in mind there. All right. Well, that's going to do it for our show. Again, just a reminder that this is your last opportunity to enter our giveaway for the 2 main level value game tickets. And a reminder, those games are those series that are eligible for the giveaway are the ones against the Angels and the Brewers in April, and then the Rangers and A's in the month of May. Let us know which one you would like to go to down in the comments below. And as long as you're subscribed and leave a comment on this video or any of the videos from this week, you are entered into the giveaway. All right. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez. That's DANEGNZLZ. And Colby at CPAT11. That's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well at Locked On Mariners. That's one word, Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball. Win your league by listening to Matt and Dom every day as they bring you the best fantasy draft strategies. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts, just like us. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And with that, have yourself a beautiful baseball day and a beautiful baseball weekend. And we'll see you on Monday. Peace.